Greetings, everyone, and welcome again to another Sabbath Insight. I am Chief Yuya, Chief Jegna of the ANU Nation and Head Priest of the ANU Life Global Ministries. I want to thank you for all of you who've joined and really want to speak about in this session, those of you who've sort of been feeling like, or speak to, I should say, those of you who've been feeling like you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and you've kind of, for those of you who pray, those of you who fast, who've put in the work, you feel like you've tried, but when you look around sort of at your life, it seems like nothing's moving, or like the job hasn't necessarily shifted, or your relationship feels very dry, or the dream that you have is still just a dream, right? Nothing is coming forth. Some of you may be in a space now where even your spirit feels quiet. You almost feel like you've been abandoned, and maybe you've started whispering some of the dangerous and harmful phrases that people often will say to themselves, which is, maybe it's too late for me. Maybe I've missed my time. Maybe I should just give up. The ship has sailed. I know that place. I know that space. And if we're being honest, I would say that every one of us at some point in our life has known that place. If you can picture a farmer, who plants a seed, right? Days can go by and the soil will still look the same. And then strongs will go by, months will go by, even the field looks dead. And if the farmer's impatient, they may say, the seed has failed me, but they can't see what they can't see beneath the soil. The roots are actually working. There's a hidden, there's a silent, there's an invisible, but there's still work, and in truth, that's what life feels like, sometimes when there's an appearance where things look dead, but in truth, they're in a gestation state, So when things are right on time, the roots break, right? And they break through the soil. And then suddenly in your life or in the soil for the farmer, what looked like was nothing, was actually preparation for everything that was coming. We have to sometimes get to that space where we understand that the divine's timing is not your timing. It's not the same. When you look at Habakkuk 2:3, it says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry, So an appointed time means that there's a sacred schedule, right? There's a sacred schedule written in everyone's destiny. We're all on a schedule, and you can't rush that schedule. You can't stop that schedule. If you think of even Sarah was laughing at the promise of a child when her body said it's too late. So even at that appointed time, Isaac came forth, so not earlier, not later, but right on that exact time. In Kabbalic teachings, we speak about time as not being necessarily a straight line, but time being a spiral. You've heard me say that probably 1,000 times. Time, I think I even said it in a song, Raphael Healing or Raphael Time, one of my, I don't remember the title, but it's a spiral, so every cycle that you go through in life, it brings you back to the same point, but at an octave higher. Like in music, you have octaves, which is every eighth note is an octave, right? So you might be here, let's say there's different points. You might be here and you're saying, well, life is just moving like this along a line, and I'm right back, and I'm going in a circle, and I'm right back where I started. No, life is moving in a spiral. So when you get here again, you're actually up. You're here, here, here. You see, so you're moving at a higher octave, and that means what looks like to you that might be a repeat of failure might actually be your next layer of evolution. When we think about in Esheshe, or what we call the Yoruba sort of cosmology and thought, Orumila teaches that your destiny unfolds like something that is being planted. So we call that Ayanmo, the Ayanmo. Ayanmo is your fate, right? And the Ayanmo has a rhythm to it, and when you try to dig it up before the season, it's like tearing a seed out of the earth that hasn't done its job yet. In alchemy, we teach about the transformation that comes, that early stage, which we call the nigredo. I spoke about that in one of the segments previously, the different stages and the three stages, primary stages in alchemy. But the nigredo is the black stage, as you could probably almost tell from the name, right? But it's the stage of breaking down. It's the silence, right? So to the untrained eye, looking at the nigredo, it looks like death, but when you're looking at things from the mystical eye, you know that black is the beginning of gold, right? So you might feel like nothing is happening. You might feel like you're ready to walk away from a relationship, walk away from your vision, or even walk away from yourself, you know. Uh, But I'm telling you, it's not too late. You're not someone that's forgotten. You are on time. The stillness that you're feeling, it's not rejection, it's gestation. So silence is not always abandonment. It's the hidden clock of your ayanmo, or your destiny, that's ticking in secret. And if you can hold on, what looks like nothing will suddenly reveal itself as everything. uh, Looking at like the numerological value of these things, because the creator really encoded timing in the numbers. You look at the number nine, like we're in the year of the nine, right? Nine is the number of completion and birth. A child grows in the womb for 9 months. Many of you feel like something in your life may have ended, or you're at the edge of collapse, or it's just important to know that that's not the end. What looks like the end oftentimes is a birthing gate. So what looks like loss is often labor. You're going through labor pains. You look at the number seven. Seven is the number of cycles and spiritual rest. So creation was completed in 7 cycles, right? The land itself rests every 7th year. So when nothing sort of seems to move in your life, it could be because you're going through a 7 cycle, which is a divine Sabbath. Your spirit says rest, prepare, reset. Then you have the number 12. 12 is divine order. I spoke about that recently. The 12 tribes, 12 months, 12 gates, 12 stones, 12 zodiacals, we just go on, right? 12 disciples. Yeah, you get the point, right? Many relationships and businesses, even sort of inner lives, they stall because they're out of order. The energy won't release until you align with proper structure. So divine timing waits for proper balance. I would say the next time you kind of feel yourself like, oh, I'm delayed, you need to ask yourself, am I in a cycle of 9, which means I could be birthing? Am I in a cycle of 7, which means that my spirit, like things are at rest around me? Or maybe I'm at a cycle of 12 where I'm restructuring. This is a restructuring time for me. The numbers are not just arithmetic. It may sound like it. They're a secret destiny, or a secret clock, I would say, of your destiny. There's always this hidden mathematics at work at all times in our life. And if we're going to understand divine timing, we have to look at the language that Elohim wrote into creation. The language of the Elohim is mathematics. So the language of numbers aren't just, like I said, an arithmetic. Numbers are spiritual laws that are hidden in plain sight. They're the blueprint of order. Like I said, when you look at the number 9, 9 is the number of endings, but also birth. You know, um, being in the year of the nine, as we've spoken about so much, a lot of times in this time, it may feel like things are just ending, your dreams are ending, your ideas are ending, and, your sort of hopes and dreams, but you may not realize like you're in the delivery room, you're not in the room of destruction. If you think about Yahweh, he gave up his spirit at the ninth hour. So what looked like the end of like the story was actually the beginning of this experience and testimony that so many people could see like, oh, this was a master teacher. So when you're in a season of nine, you don't panic. Something is being born, even if all you're seeing is pain. You know, there's cycles of rest in your seven. Seven is your spiritual rest. And we know, of course, we read at least the Bereshit tell. The Creator makes the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and the land itself was commanded to rest every seventh year. So even the human body, from a biological perspective, it cells renew in 7-year cycles. So when you feel like nothing is moving, you may be in a seventh season. That spiritual Sabbath. It's a reset. It's not like something forgot you and tossed you to the side. And a lot of times I've found that people try to force fruit in a sabbatical season. They're pushing to make things happen when Shemaim, or the heavens, have actually caused for a pause. And in those times, your work is to recharge, your work is to reset, and to allow the spirit to restore order. On your 12th energy, like I said, that's divine order. You have your 12 tribes, your 12 disciples, your 12 gates of the heavenly city, 12 months in a year, 12 hours of the day, 12 hours of the night, right? Whatever. And I'm sure there's more 12s you can think of, 12 jurors. When things get sort of stuck or feel stuck in your life, sometimes it's because you're out of alignment with divine order. So relationships won't move forward because the foundation is crooked. Your finances are not flowing like they should because your structure isn't right. Your spirit waits until the vessel is balanced before releasing the next season in your life. That's why sometimes you'll see a sudden sort of breakthrough after years of waiting, because the order is now set. So now divine time opens the gate. You see, there's a key to it. When you feel delayed, you got to ask yourself, what season am I in? Birthing, resting, restructuring. 9, 7, 12. If it's 9, then your pain that you're feeling is labor. If it's 7, the silence that you're experiencing, feeling, or whatever, not hearing, is Sabbath. If it's 12, your delay is divine order. Things have to be put in order. So either way, you're not necessarily off schedule. You're still on time, but you just have to learn how to tune into the frequency of the time, which I understand sometimes for some folks can be a little difficult. One of the blessings of numbers is that numbers, they give us structure. And our wisdom traditions tell us that numbers are a language to interpret the silence and the waiting and in the so-called delays. Like I said, you have this spiral of time in the Kabbalah, where we understand that it's not a linear line going across, but a spiral. So if you think of like coils in a spring, right? You keep returning to the same place, but at a higher elevation, so that means a lot of times when you find that space where you're like, oh man, I feel stuck, I'm not moving, you may be actually circling to the next coil, to a familiar lesson, but from a higher vantage point. So what looks like stagnation is really just ascent. You're spiritually ascending, but you're like, man, I'm in the same place again. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says that which has been is that which will be, and that which is done is that what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. So from a mystical perspective, that's not despair. That's a design. That's life being a spiral staircase that moves you higher every cycle. And Isese, or in the Yoruba system, like I said, we have that rhythm of Ayanmo. And when Orunmila is the diviner of wisdom teaches things that teaches in particular in this context that there's a rhythm. Everything unfolds in rhythm. So destiny is not a race to a finish line, right? That's sort of like a Western perspective. I got to get there. Destiny is something that moves as a drum beat. A yanmo is a rhythm. It's a beat. So you can't rush a drum or you'll be off timing, right? If that's the clock, that's the clock. And everybody has their own clock. And some people's clock may be like this. Some people's clock may not even be a 1/4 time. It might be maybe 3/4, like that. That's a different rhythm, or if maybe your Boricua, because that's 6/8 rhythm, right? Not everybody is this. You might be 3/4, you might be 6/8. But either way, if you clap off beat, you can't expect harmony. So if you move off beat, it's going to be disharmonious. So some of you might feel delayed because you're trying to dance on a rhythm that doesn't belong to your destiny. The drum hasn't called that step yet. And when it comes to relationships, I can say your wisdom shares that every union has an ori, or a spiritual head, that must agree before the two can actually prosper. So if you force a connection before the ori aligns, you'll feel friction, in a relationship instead of a flow. You'll that waiting may not be a rejection. It may be spirit waiting for alignment. Like I spoke earlier about the alchemical transformation, you have Negredo. And the first stage, Negredo, or the black stage, as it's often called, like I said, it may look like death. It may feel like despair. It may feel like something other than the breaking down of all forms is happening. That's what Negredo is, the breaking of all forms. So a lot of times, like some of you might be in Negredo now, your relationships have dissolved, plans have collapsed, your spirit feels like ash, But alchemists knew that Negredo was not the end, it was the beginning, because it's only from the blackening that albedo, which is the purification stage, and rubedo, which is the completion of the red stage of gold, could happen. So what may look like a collapse of your life may actually be a prelude to your life's refinement. That nothingness is a raw material state that you have to go through for new creation. In Torah, we see, like I said, Abraham and Sarah, and they were promised a child in decades past. Bodies grew old, and logic said the promise is dead, like it expired. You read this 21st chapter of Genesis, Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. Elohim had spoken. So it wasn't at Abraham's time. It wasn't at Sarah's time. It was at the set time. And Isaac's name means laughter. So what Sarah thought was a laugh of disbelief became a laugh of joy, maybe even embarrassment. The delay was sort of like a divine theater to prove that when Elohim does it, nobody can deny that it was him. Like, that had to have been Yah who did that, because how the heck else could this old couple have a child? Like, it had to have been Yah doing it. Sometimes your delays are that. They're orchestrated, or the timing is set in a way so that the way it comes forth and who it comes from is undeniable. Like I said, you have that Kabbalic spiral in time, not a straight line. Yoruba tells us we have a rhythm. The alchemy tells us that there has to be a breakdown stage of transformation. And Torah proves that promises that are delayed are promises that are preserved for a set time. So you have all these different sort of systems, we could say, although they're all really one. And they just say the same thing, like there's cycles, seasons, you're not late, you most likely are on time. A lot of times that sort of messed up thinking comes from serving Kronos instead of Chyros. if you're kind of a person who feels like you're behind in life, it may not necessarily be because the spirit has abandoned you. It could be because you've been taught to worship a false god, the god of Kronos. You may have heard that term before. You've heard me talk about Kronos before. You know, Kronos was the devourer of time. You know, in Greek mythology, Kronos was a titan, and he was considered to be the god of time, but he was known as a devourer, which is the important thing. Kronos consumed his own children because he feared that they were going to overthrow him. So that's exactly what happens when you serve Kronos. When you serve Kronos, you sacrifice your joy, you sacrifice your peace, you sacrifice your relationships, you sacrifice even your own health on the altar of the clock. So we'll say, yo, by this age, I should have this. By now, I should have been here. And yet, when you're saying that, you're trying to keep up with Kronos. You know, when you live by Kronos, you end up living by anxiety. You know, you're enslaved to deadlines and to comparisons, and you know that slavery causes you to miss the deeper rhythm of your destiny. Then you have Chyros. Chyros is considered the cosmic knowing, right? That's Elohim never called us to serve Kronos. Elohim called us to serve Chyros. Chyros isn't measured by calendars. It's not measured by clocks. It's cosmic time. So it's that sacred cycle, that appointed moment. It's when heaven and earth agree with each other. So it's a rhythm of sowing and reaping, of moon phases, of Sabbaths, of 9 months of gestation, of seasons of silence followed by release. Chyros says, don't panic in the winter because the spring is coming. Don't rush in your planting because, harvest is coming. When it's dark, don't give up because the dawn is coming. So when you're serving Chyros, it means that you're recognizing that there's the creator's cycles, and it's more important than your stopwatch. It means that when you align with the spiral, instead of being enslaved to the straight line, you now get an alignment with the cosmic sort of movement. It was Acts 1:7. It says, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons when the Father has put in his own power. So that means don't try to serve Kronos, knock it off. You can't live by Kronos. Your life is not determined by a calendar. It's determined by a cosmic degree. So the Most High holds seasons, not Kronos. Galatians 4:4 says, but when the fullness of time has come, Elohim sent forth his son. So fullness of time means Chyros. Doesn't mean at this date. When all things were aligned, that's when it's full. It wasn't too early, wasn't too late. It was right on time. So sometimes you end up serving a false god as opposed to knowing cycles. When you bind yourself to Kronos, you're unknowingly bowing to a foreign altar. You see, you're serving a false deity that demands exhaustion and rewards you with despair. You see, when you're in alignment with Chyros, you're tapping into cosmic knowing. You're not chasing time. You're listening. You're listening out for the cycles. You know that even silence has a season. Stillness, even, there's a rhythm inside of stillness. So that's why our ancestors tracked in lunar calendars. They tracked in Sabbaths. They tracked in Jubilees. They knew that real power would flow in cycles, not in the constant grind of Kronos, or chronology. So the real problem isn't just, being impatient. The real problem is idolatry. Too many of us have bowed down to Kronos, the devourer, instead of trusting Chyros, the divine cycle. And until you sort of break that allegiance, you'll always feel behind in life. You'll always feel like you're out of sync, or you'll feel like nothing in your life is moving. But if you can shift from serving Kronos to trusting Chyros, you'll see you're not late, but again, you're right on time. There's some practical sort of keys and methods that we can utilize to start to repair some of this thinking. If Kronos is the devourer and Chyros is the rhythm of the skies or heavens, then how do we step out of the slavery to the clock and step into divine timing, right? That would be the concern. There's a couple ways we can do that. One, align yourself with rhythm, right? You need rhythm, cosmic rhythm and personal rhythm. In our Hermetic laws, we have the law of rhythm, right? Or we could say the principle of rhythm, which is a better term. And the principle of rhythm says everything that flows in also flows out. Everything that rises will also fall. So the pendulum swings in equal measure. If you're out of tune with rhythm, you will always feel late. In the Hebraic thought, the Elohim says that it gives us what we call the modim. And the modim is the appointed times. Sabbaths every 7 year, sabbatical years every 7th year, Jubilee after 7 cycles of 7. So those weren't just holy days, they were cosmic markers teaching us that there's this time that breathes in cycles of rest, release, renewal. So your own life should follow similar cycles: 9 months of gestation, 7-year phases of testing and shifting, seasons when Elohim calls for order before release. So you can do things like mark your own 7-year turning in your journal, your seasons of loss, breakthrough, pay attention to like how certain months or times of the year feel like supercharged for you. Once you get to a point where you start to know your rhythm, you can start fighting or stop fighting time, and you start to flow with it because you understand your cycles. Also, I would say honor stillness. In alchemy, in that Negredo stage, there's a stillness of death, right? In the Kabbalah, creation begins with Toha Vahbohu, which is called the formless and the void, right? In Yoruba, you have a silence before the drum beat, before the next hit hits. So stillness is not empty. It's the womb of all things that are getting ready to become. So when nothing moves, create ritual. Light your candle. Let the flame be a teacher to you, right? Practice your breath. Keep order in your space as a mirror of the order that you're waiting on. Don't resist the stillness. Consecrate the stillness. Oh, it's still now? All right, cool. Let me make it a consecrated time. Create this order around me because I know order is coming. In the Kabbalah, you got to understand it like you are a microcosmic representation of the Sephiroth. So in Yoruba, your Oriya, your head, your inner destination must be cared for, or your path will begin to warp, right? So when you abandon yourself in the silence, it's like neglecting the temple, Your spirit won't deliver a promise to a vessel that you've forsaken. You got to eat, you got to rest, like simple practical things. Eat, rest, keep studying, keep sharpening the gifts that you have. And even when no one notices, it doesn't matter. Speak life to yourself every day. You're the soil. If you dry up, the seed's not going to grow. Another thing I would say, act with precision. In mystical law, divine doors begin to open at appointed moments. Just like this feast of Israel that was set for a time for heaven and earth to align, you have Kairos moments that come as windows. And they're brief, but they're powerful. If you hesitate, the window closes, right? And then you wait for the next cycle. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but you wait for the next one. So you prepare in the silence so that you're ready in the opening. Think about Noah building the ark before the rain even came, or Astarte. Fasted before she was summoned. Your preparation keeps you from missing a season when it finally arrives, right? So in a simple sense, align yourself with rhythm, honor your sacred cycles and your personal seasons, honor the stillness. You treat your silence as a womb, not as punishment. Stay present to yourself, right? Guard your Ori, your Sephiroth, your temple. Act with precision. Step boldly when Chyros opens up for you. When the portal opens, step into it. That's how you stop serving Kronos and you begin living as a keeper of divine rhythm. This is how you discover that there's no such thing as too late. There's only right on time, right? So I want to just share this in closing, and I want to speak about a country that I've been to several times and enjoyed myself there, Burkina Faso. If you look at it right now, this is a nation that has been bloodied by massacres, coups, many years of chaos. And out of all of that, there rises a 34-year-old man, Ibrahim Traoré. He becomes the youngest head of state in the world by force of Chyros, not election, or anything else, force of Chyros. I'm not saying he's a perfect king, but so I'm not deifying him, in the flesh. But what I am saying is that he's a messianic force. And the Messiah force is not one person, it's a current. And it's a cosmic current that enters vessels in times of crisis to realign a people with destiny. You see, Traoré, he comes forward at 34 years old. 3 plus 4 equals 7. 7 is the number of divine cycles of completion and rest. So he rose up in a season where the land was crying for a Sabbath, for a reset, like, yo, enough. So Burkina Faso has known repeated collapses. If you look at the history, like every 7 to 9 years. That's not random. That's labor pains. That's contractions. 9 is the birthing. 7 is the completion. So each upheaval in Burkina Faso is the womb convulsing, saying a new order has to be born. So Traoré doesn't just come representing a man, but more so a numerological code, a 7-cycle reset into a 9 birthing, And like I said, in the alchemy and in the Grado stage, you have the blackness, the burning away, the collapse. In the Kabbalah, that's the din. We call it the din. The din is the harsh judgment that breaks so that mercy can now flow once that breaks. In our Yoruba system, you have a Rumula's drumbeat saying, wait, align, move. Wait, align, move. So, like, what does it look like? In natural, it looks like a young person standing in a portal, not the promise itself, but a signpost of the promise. The Messiah force is not about perfect flesh. It's about perfect timing. So the Spirit sends a vessel in Chyros to remind people that the delay was not a denial. And even in blood, there is still a birthing, you see. So Burkina Faso might look like ruin to one, but it's a womb. Ibrahim Traoré looks like a soldier, but he's actually a sign. So the nation now, it might look stuck, but it's right on time, right? And if this is true of a land, then it can be true of a person. It could be true in your life. The chaos is not necessarily collapse. It could be your Negrito stage. The silence is not necessarily abandonment. It could be your Sabbath stage. And the delay and the feel of denial that you feel could be your portal. So you don't want to miss the code. When the land convulses, the Messiah force rises. When your soul and your spirit convulses, that same Messiah force stares inside of you. It makes you right on time, and you're not late. The convulsions. So you have to be able to say the signs of Chyros are in my life, and the way nations see upheavals, there's going to be an upheaval, but I can discern messianic force. And I say that to you, the work of your struggle, that you still rise. Not rising as one who is devoured by Kronos, but as one who's carried by the spiral of divine timing, knowing that I'm not forgotten, I'm not late, I'm on time. All right. So that's what I wanted to share with you on this insight, family. And willfully just brought you to a space mentally and spiritually where you can take a sharper, more scrutinizing look at your own cycles and remove yourself and renounce yourself from continuing to serve the Greek god Kronos or chronology. All right. And start to learn to serve cycle. We just came out of a cycle, ANU Nation. We do a fast every season change, every solstice and every equinox. So we just did the autumn equinox, and some of us do 7 days or 3 days, and different kinds of fast. Some people just fast from sugar. Some people fast from everything, dry fast, no food, no liquid. Some people just do liquid, whatever it is. But we just acknowledge that, okay, new cycle, new season, new stuff popping off. All right. So, more props to all the ANU who participated in the fast for this cycle. And our next one will be coming up, and if you didn't, we still have the winter one that will be coming up. So you can be present for us for that, for the winter solstice. All right. So thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for being a part of this experience. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to serve in this way and to wake up and resurrect the mind of the people who are cut of the same fabric. All right. So until next time, those of you who would like to be a part of ANU, go to the website, join up, apply, and let's get into this together. Thank you for your support and thank you for your presence. Please make sure if you're not, I never say this, but I'm going to start saying, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. If you think you subscribed before, just check and make sure. I've been getting some reports of people automatically being taken off. It is what it is. But some people have told me that, they thought I don't have the power to unsubscribe you. So just double check and that you hit the bell so you get all the notifications. All right. But definitely be a part of this experience and this journey. And thank you so much. This is Chief Yuya. I'm signing out. Shalom Aleichem.